Thank you, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the session. This one's a more serious session. Okay. Yeah, I was just running off at the mouth as usual. Talking shit. I mean, always. I mean, you know that by now. So, my proposal is that we focus on black today, and we just really cement things, and then next time we'll transition to white because we have some time. Does that sound good?
Works for me.
Okay, because the Sicilian's a pretty serious opening. I really want to make sure that we're covering everything. Okay. So we'll reconstruct what it is exactly that people do against you. Now, I'm seeing this. 52 games, knight f3. And the second most common move is bishop c4, where you've responded correctly to every time. Yeah, so I'm just looking to see if there's anything dangerous that was played against you. Okay, so knight f3. Now knight c6. Okay, so 27 games d4. 11 games bishop c4. Let's quickly review bishop c4. Good. Now, most people have gone d3 against you.
The rule of thumb, I know in this position I don't bring up the g pawn next, right?
Exactly. Nicely done. You don't bring up e6 and g6 at the same time. So here, it's a slightly different strategy. Okay, so bishop g5 has been played 3 times against you. You won all 3 games.
Okay, chase it away first, right?
You can. You don't necessarily have to, but you can go ahead and control the center now.
Okay, so I'd still just want to play this anyway.
Yep. And how are you going to deal with this pin?
If he takes the pawn, I take the bishop. If not, then I just...
Let's say bishop b3.
I just bring up the f7, right? f7 bishop, break it?
Yep. Bishop b7, exactly. Bishop b7, then you castle. Then you can... Actually, this bishop... So this would be a great example of not actually getting this bishop to g4, although you can. If he goes knight c3, you notice that he's putting pressure, pretty serious pressure on this pawn. So where would you put this bishop to remedy that?
And just over to e6.
And then let's say that both sides castle. And let's say that white plays a move like rook e1. So one really good plan here in this position is to try to get b5 in. How can you prepare that move?
By dropping that bishop back? No.
So remember that the best way to prepare a pawn move is usually with another pawn move.
So I just go a6 first.
a6. And does the purpose of b5 make sense?
Yeah, we're trying to chase away the knight, right?
Well, and we're also trying to trap the bishop. So let's just make some random moves. You're actually trying to trap the bishop. Another Naroditsky super shooter here. And d takes e4, the bishop is trapped. But,
Okay, so I imagine, though, most people, when they see this, then I didn't notice it, but I would guess they'll just push that a pawn next.
Yeah, you mean they'll play a3.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, what most people will do. But the thing is, after you play c4 anyway, although you don't trap their bishop, you can see that this bishop is completely buried.
Yeah,
it's literally, and it's staring at the pawn chain. If it goes to b1, it's going to be staring at the pawn. So white is virtually playing without a piece. You can play queen c7, then rook d8. And this is, again, a concept that, a couple of months ago I wouldn't have bothered bringing up. But now I think you can wrap your head around it. So, like, when you can make your opponent's pieces this passive for a prolonged period of time, that's a pretty big deal because they're basically playing without that piece.
That makes sense.
And yeah, so there's a good example of this in classical chess, but we'll talk about that later. So that's perfect. Now let's transition to the main move, d4. Go ahead. Okay, so d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, 27 games. Yep. And now 16 people played knight takes c6. That's the most common move that's played against you.
Yeah. Almost
everyone did. Right, knight c6. Now bc is correct. Now 8 people go knight c3. And that's the most common move.
It's still just fianchettoing, right?
Just fianchettoing the bishop. Now 3 games bishop d2, 3 games bishop c4. Okay, bishop c4 is the more I see what you're saying, I think. So bishop c4 is the more active move.
So I can't bring my knight up to where I want it because he just pushes that pawn, and I can't take that pawn. So I'd have to
Right,
drop
so
the
this
knight
is
again.
exactly the situation which you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Now, if you accidentally played into this situation, something that we talked about earlier, you actually have a very cool idea here that can help you get out of this. You can play knight g4. And this is only possible because there's a bishop on c4. Now, queen takes g4, what's the point?
All I can see is pushing that d pawn to attack the queen.
Good. And attack what else?
The pawn.
Think again. You can win the piece back.
Oh, I see. Okay. If he en passant, I win the queen. Okay, so I'm just
Exactly.
pushing up to d5.
Good, and then you win the bishop back.
Yeah.
So that's a crazy idea. But what I wanted to say is, even if you've allowed this and you don't have knight g4, you can always bring the knight back to g8. And it's not easy to just checkmate black. The knight can then redeploy itself through h6 and f5.
Okay.
So my point is, you're going to fuck up once in a while in these positions, and sometimes just bringing the piece back is better than, panicking and giving it up, for example. So
Then where do I want to go then from here?
So you have two options here. One, the best move is to play queen c7. And the purpose of this move is to cover the e5 square with the queen. They're probably going to castle. And here you go knight f6. And e5 is not possible because of queen takes e5. Now, if they try to prepare e5 with the move f4, can you prevent e5 once again with your pawns this time?
Yeah, no, I can just bring up the d pawn.
Exactly. And now e5 isn't even that dangerous because the knight is the g4 square. Now you're going to castle. Remember that when they take on c6, they open up the b file for you. So you can always play the move rook to b8. And then you can slowly prepare the pawn break d5.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, yeah, you actually, the funny thing is against, you actually did play knight f6 here 3 times and nobody played e5. But now you're going to make sure that you play queen c7.
Yeah.
And yeah, so against bishop d2, which is a very awkward move. I mean, knight f6 here actually is okay because after e5, what additional square does the knight now have?
No, it has d5.
Yeah, but still, I wouldn't really bother with this move. Now, one of the reasons bishop d2 is bad is because the queen blocks the connection to d5. So you can just play the move d5. And after takes, if they give you a check on b5, how can you block this check?
With the bishop.
Does that give up the d5 pawn?
Oh, yeah, because now it's not defended by the queen.
Are you sure about that? Look at the whole board, look at what pieces are left undefended.
Oh, then I just win his bishop.
You just win his bishop. And if he takes your bishop after bishop d7?
I take with the queen defending the
Exactly.
pawn.
Very nice. So that's basically the lay of the land against these moves. The last thing that was played against you more than once is bishop to d3. And here, once again, you have a choice. And both times you played the move e5. Now you know that that's a bit of a mistake. So here you can play the move d6 and then knight f6. Or you could play queen up to c7. That's also fine. Right, so the key is to prevent e5 first and then develop the knight.
So would you prefer me stopping that with the queen or with the d pawn?
Usually, I'll put it this way. I'll make it easier and say with the d pawn. There is a specific reason that after bishop to c4, queen c7 is marginally more accurate. But you know what? You can play d6 here anyway.
Okay.
This is fine. This is fine. And then knight f6 and castles. So just stop it with the d pawn. And if they try to enforce it somehow, then remember that you always have this in your pocket.
Makes sense.
Great. So now let's briefly review the moves that are not knight takes c6. 6 games, knight c3. Actually 9 games because you transpose continue. And now once again, a couple of people took on c6 and 3 games continued bishop e3. And 3 times you played this move e5, which we now talk through, is wrong.
In this position, I still want to just develop this because you can't push that pawn right now.
Right. So the one person that you played this against, this was the game that we actually played together, was f4. And if they play f4 to prepare e5, you do what?
D pawn.
Very nice. Now, the only time that you have to allow e5, they can play knight takes c6, b takes c6, and they can play the move e5.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one line that you have to like memorize, because I'm pretty sure that this is going to happen against people who are slightly more advanced at this stuff. Now here, you actually drop your knight back. This is theory. You actually drop your knight back to g8. And black is actually in very good shape here. Trust me. I know it looks horrible at first, but you see that this pawn is hanging.
Yep.
Now, most people are going to defend the pawn by playing f4, but now this knight can go where?
It can go h6.
Exactly, and from h6, where can it go?
f5.
Potentially. You can chill on h6. Now, how are you going to break into this pawn chain to make sure that this bishop is once again active?
Is it just pushing the d pawn again?
You're a natural.
Okay.
But first I would castle. So let's say they develop their bishop. I would first castle to make sure the king is safe. Then after castles, you can either bring your knight into the game immediately, but there's no hurry. The knight is fine on h6. I would play d6 here.
Okay, and when he takes, I take with pawn, right?
Yeah, take with the pawn, and then notice that the e-file has also opened, so you can bring the rook to e8.
Okay, that sounds good.
No, I mean, I can just sense that you have good understanding in these positions. There's a lot more to talk about, but that's basically everything that's been played against you in the accelerated. Ludwig played bishop b5, and you beat him. And, okay, so what I'm noticing, really the only thing I'm noticing you do consistently wrong is this move e5. So against Ludwig, what happened was he played here, which is a bit of an empty move. So it was this. Now you castled, he castled. And guess what move you played?
Push the pawn, I guess.
Yeah, you played e5.
Oh, I pushed the pawn.
Yeah, but what should you do here? And this is a bit tougher because you can't really play d6. So what do you think you should do here with black?
Is it just chase the bishop away?
Exactly. Go ahead. Now, if the bishop moves back, then...
I'm still just wanting to push it, right?
And here's the thing. Now that you've played the move b5, your bishop on c8 can go where?
It can go to b7.
And that's the double fianchetto. The bishop exerts pressure on the pawn. That's an ideal scenario. If the bishop moves backward, then you can play b5, but you can also now play d6 and get the bishop out this way.
Okay,
so very simple. Emphasis on development, preventing e5, and you almost never play e5 yourself or even e6.
Okay. Yeah, I just need to remember that, I think.
And practice. You know, you're doing everything right. You just need a lot of practice games. What we're gonna do also next time is we're gonna delve a little bit deeper into some of these games. And talk about some middle game ideas. But for now, I want you to really master the opening moves, which you're in the process of doing. Let's talk a little bit about d4. Because you mentioned that you were struggling a little bit against this move.
I don't know what my stats are on it, but in almost pretty much every game over the last 2 days, I play what Levy taught, which was going pretty much the exact
Dutch.
same Sicilian on this side.
Okay, and that's called the Dutch.
Yeah, the Dutch.
Your stats are actually quite good here. So let's just review. I definitely like that choice. It's a very it's an opening that's similar in spirit to what you're playing with the Accelerated Dragon. So although it has a bit of a less cool name. I mean,
yeah, the Accelerated Dragon just sounds so nice.
But the Dutch is a bit of a dubious reputation, but wrongly so. It's actually a very solid opening. Okay, so 2 people played bishop f4 against you. I just want to test you on the main ideas here.
Okay. Yeah. I think I castle first and then I block, don't I?
You castle. E3.
So in a lot of games, I know I play this and then push the e pawn.
And that's the ultimate idea. That's the correct plan.
Okay.
Now, can you push the e pawn here? Like,
no,
is it a good idea? I mean, you obviously you can, but
yeah.
Will you get your nuts chopped off if you do that? Wow.
Well, just so because of that bishop move, what does that threaten with the plan? Actually, I was looking at the c pawn here, but I don't think that's right.
Well, don't overthink. I mean, first, I mean, what should White do here?
He just takes with pawn first.
Takes with pawn and then takes with the knight.
I see. Yeah.
So the ultimate idea is to go e5, but this needs to be prepared. So how do you prepare it?
I can bring my knight over to g4.
Ideally, you'd want to prepare it by developing pieces, though.
Oh, I just bring my knight to c6 then.
Very good. And one of the cool things about the Dutch is that if white plays d5 to attack your knight, you have a very, very strong response. You can actually play e5. I don't know if Levi showed you this idea, but this is an important idea in the Dutch. Now, why does this move work? First of all, what happens if he just takes your knight?
I take his bishop.
You take his bishop, and that's a very important bishop. This is a very beneficial trade for black, and then you can take his pawn. If the bishop moves, then you just move the knight, and you've succeeded in playing e5. If he takes en passant, then
I just take the pawn.
you just take on e6, and you've got a great position. Then you can play h6, g5. So does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Now let's say that white castles. Here, you have to be accurate.
So black to play right now?
Yeah. And I think I've seen you play this correct move before, and I'm pretty sure Levi talked about this idea. It's a knight move.
Is it going to e4?
Yeah, and there's a couple of ideas. So first of all, you open up the diagonal for the bishop. So now e5 actually has been prepared. But this trade on e4, it may look weird that you're doubling the pawns, but the reality is there's a tactic here that makes everything work out for black. So let's say the knight moves back to d2. Find this tactic for black. And it's an overloading tactic.
So I'm just looking to reinforce that pawn.
Believe it or not, you don't give a damn about this pawn.
Okay, so that's worthless to the attack.
Now you see that the rook is kind of staring at the bishop.
Yeah.
What's defending that bishop?
Just a pawn.
Just a pawn. And that's a very sort of fragile situation, right? That pawn on e3, pawns are very often overloaded because it's not only defending the bishop.
Oh, so do I just take that d pawn with the knight
Bingo.
and win the bishop?
Exactly. You take the pawn with the knight. And if he takes back, then you play rook takes f4, and you defend this pawn, by the way.
Okay.
But of course, white doesn't have to take the knight. White can take your pawn.
Right.
And you can take his bishop, he takes your knight. Now, nobody has won anything, but you have made a very big gain because you've eliminated an important bishop. You've opened up your bishop, and you basically have the two bishop advantage now. Now, how about this bishop? Where can it go? Where should it develop itself to?
I'm looking at f5.
I see actually a more sexy option for the bishop. Don't forget about the double fianchetto. Because
okay, so I just want to... Do I want to do the same idea? a6, then b5?
why a6, b5? Why can't you just fianchetto it straight away?
So just push it up one and then go in?
Exactly. And
Okay.
why do I notice the idea of the fianchetto? Because white is missing his light squared bishop. You just took it. So if white had a light squared bishop, he could have just put it on f3. But when your opponent doesn't have a bishop of one particular color and you do, consider fianchettoing that bishop because it's going to be super strong on that long diagonal and it's going to be uncontested. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
So in terms of attacking the king, this is a very good idea. So knight e4 is an idea. You're basically preparing e5. And not everybody's going to get their bishop to 4. Some of your opponents played e3, which is a very bad move. It just keeps the bishop behind the pawn chain. Now you just castle, you play d6. Knight c6, and then you play e5. And I think this is a good opening. Have you felt okay in the Dutch?
Yeah, I think so for the most part. It's just I think a lot of times I don't know where to go. Like, I pretty much, no matter what they play the exact same 5 moves without fail.
Yeah, that's basically the case.
Okay,
And
is that like the right way of doing that, or should I be looking for other things instead of just staying so like textbook with it?
Well, you are going to end up making these moves, but it's good practice to at least pay attention to what your opponent is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And your opponent could do something crazy, like he could play e4 in this position, which would allow you to do what?
I just take.
You just take the pawn, right? So you want to look dynamically at what your opponent is doing, because some of your opponents are going to do some crazy stuff, just because of the nature of playing an opening like this at your level. Like, people don't know it. But what I really want to emphasize here, no matter what white does, your main plan is going to be to play e5.
Mm-hmm.
But if for whatever reason you're having a hard time preparing e5, try to make natural moves, try to develop your pieces, and don't shoot yourself in the foot, because white has ways of trying to discourage you from playing e5. So that's going to come with practice. I'm definitely going to pay attention to your Dutch games, but by and large, yes, you play the same 5 moves against everything, as long as you just pay more attention to what they're doing.
Okay, so then for this here, let's say I bring knight to c6, he pushes pawn up. Where do I want that knight to go next?
Right, so let's say castles knight c6. Now, you want this knight to go to e5.
Okay, so he takes that spot.
So knight takes that spot, and if knight takes, you take with a pawn. Now, at first sight, it may seem like, well, what are we doing, right? The pawns are doubled. But, in addition, our bishop is now biting on the pawn. But this pawn on e5, what can happen to it? What can you do with that pawn?
I can just push it up right now.
You can push it up. And what's going to happen is not only does our bishop open, but his bishop is closed. And you've got a beautiful pawn chain here. So you've got a great position. Now, this pawn on d5, you can undermine that pawn. You can get rid of it with what move?
My double pawn right there, push it to e6, right?
And that's why doubled pawns can be so good, right? The other pawn, both pawns can have a very important responsibility. So you play e6, you've got a good free position, and then you can bring a rook to d8. It really depends on what white does at that point.
Okay, makes sense.
So, no, I mean, as a kind of introductory, you know all the introductory ideas. It's just going to be all about getting practice, and I'm going to be paying attention to your games as well. And with white, you and Levy did talk about the Vienna Gambit, right?
Yeah, so that's one that every time I run it, pretty much the same thing happens. They always take and I push, and I guess I don't know where I should go there to make the most of the position.
Okay, let's maybe review that quickly.
Okay.
And then next time we'll really emphasize that. Now let me just see your white games, what people actually do. So e4, e5. Go ahead. Okay, so they usually go here, right?
I'd say at least 50% go there, so then I play the gambit here. They usually always take and I push.
Right, so they basically have to get their knight back to g8.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Usually I play this to attack that pawn and reinforce that one, but I don't know if that's right, because I don't...
So believe it or not, that's a mistake.
Okay.
And the reason that that's a mistake, and nobody actually exploited this against you, but black has a very nasty move, queen h4 check.
Somebody did play this, yeah.
Oh, okay, so somebody did play it.
Yeah.
And you can see why this is annoying, because normally you would have the move g3, normally, but here you don't have it because of f takes g3. So you have to move your king out. And so what developing move can you make to stop queen h4?
I just played knight next at f3.
You play knight f3, and you actually did play this, I think, once, and your opponent played the move. So you actually played this correctly. One second. Let me actually check my notes. So knight f3, d6. I did analyze this. So knight f3, your opponent played d6. And now you continue to develop your pieces, which I really like. How?
I bring in the bishop, right? I bring it to c4.
You bring the bishop to c4. But actually, sorry, give me a second. I'm checking my own analysis here. Yeah, in my notes, d4 is a better move, but I actually like bishop c4. Bishop c4 is good. And after d takes c5?
That pawn's hanging, so I just take that pawn.
Go ahead. Now your opponent, in this position, played the move bishop to d6.
So, real quick though, if I do take this, can't he deliver that same check, forcing me to move my king again?
That's what I was analyzing. So he can, but that check is not nearly as dangerous as it would be earlier, because now you have this f1 square for the king.
Okay.
This is not the greatest square in the world, but look at how many pieces you've developed and how many pieces he's developed.
Okay.
So this is a very, very... Black can survive here if he's super precise, but nobody's going to know, and you can trust me on this, exactly how to play in this position. And a case in point is that your opponent played bishop to d6. which allows what move?
That just wait. From here?
Yeah, white's play.
Yeah, it just gives me this.
You just take, and after queen h4?
I move here, and then I take the rook.
You take the rook. Now, you got to be a little bit careful. Let's say they go bishop to g4. Here, you have to continue being precise because they're attacking your queen.
Yeah, I can't drop my bishop because then I hang my knight, right?
Exactly. That's a good point.
Okay. Do I just look to trade queens here since I'm in a better position?
Because you're going to win the rook afterward. So you play queen e1 check, nicely done. Takes, and then you take the rook.
Okay, cool.
So in queen h4, you play king f1, and just maybe one or two more moves here. So the good players will give you that check, and then most people who recognize the threat of knight takes f7, I think that they're going to play the move bishop to e6 to try to get your bishop off of that square. But now you take on e6, and you have another very active move. You see that this pawn is undefended. How can you attack it?
I can just develop the queen, right?
Very good. And black's only way of defending that pawn is to play c6. But now you can simply play d3 and take the pawn with the bishop and bring the rook, and you've got pretty much an overwhelming position.
Okay, cool. Okay, that makes sense.
And yeah, but the key point is to play knight f3 here, rather than
instead of pushing that d pawn right away.
And eventually you can play d4 and you can recover the pawn, but the emphasis is not on recovering the pawn. So we'll work on this more next time because I don't want to overwhelm you with too many openings. I know it's very tedious. So what do you say we jump in maybe for one or two more games to round it off?
That sounds good to me.
Nice.
All right, let's run it.
Let's do it.
Well, let's see if we get right into a Vienna.
All right. Okay, so that's just blunders a pawn.
Yeah, baby.
Nice. Right. Careful about what you want to take with.
Yeah, so I usually take with the b pawn, but I see I'd hang that pawn, so I have to take with the b pawn.
Nice. Thinking on your feet.
Just chase this away, I think, right?
Sure.
Still protecting the pawn.
Right. Now, if you want to protect that pawn to the point where you don't have to worry about it,
push this.
Yep. Good. Now, this is a good example of where you can actually castle to the other side. And you can basically start attacking his king. But to attack his king, you need to open a file. And to open a file, you need to use your pawns.
So do I just want to immediately start doing that? So g4 now?
Exactly. And you're going to open up the g file. What's going to occupy that g file?
It's going to be the h knight.
You mean the rook?
Or
rook,
sorry.
All right, but first, be careful.
Yeah, so positions here. I don't really want to tuck my queen on g3 since I want my rook there, right? So do I just want to drop it like all the way back to what, like?
Well, e3 is good because that blockades the pawn. You use the pawn kind of as an umbrella, right? So he can't chase the queen away with rook e8. And in addition, you can see that the queen is making contact with the g5 square. So if you go like rook g1 and then g5, you'll be able to take that pawn with the queen in the future. And then you'll have a battery on the g file. So. Right, you can go ahead and execute that plan. Very good. So it makes sense why we're putting a rook on g1 first.
Yeah.
You're trying to, when you play g5, you want that move to be as strong as possible.
That's not threatening anything,
nope.
Right? He still has two moves to make that work, so I still want to just push this, right?
Right, and it's good. I'm glad that you kind of asked yourself that. And he really can't make anything work. Even if he attacks that b2 pawn with his queen, even if he takes that pawn, it's not going to be checkmate. You'll have the d2 square for your king. It might be unpleasant, but it's not going to be mate.
Okay, so if
So that's a great example. You can actually just ignore the threat against your pawn
Yeah,
entirely.
do I just want to take the knight then?
Yeah, because your threats against his king are going to be a million times stronger than his threats against your king.
Okay. That makes sense then. So now I'm just bringing the king up. It's the only move I have.
Very good. Okay, now all you have to do is find a way to evade the checks.
Blocking it with the pawn's probably
Good.
not a good idea, right? Because he just takes with the knight.
But then you take his knight.
So then we just make this full trade here.
Right, but you're going to be up 2 bishops. And that comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. Don't be afraid to trade queens when you're attacking, because you understand that's fine. You're going to be up a piece. He's playing this well. He's doing the best he can. But if he takes on c3 with a queen, then yes, you trade queens. Okay. So now think about... so what I would do... Well...
This pawn is hanging right here, and that's what I noticed, but then I give up the control of the c square.
Yeah, you can risk it. You can take on h6, and you'll be able to evade the checks there.
Okay.
But you've got to be careful. He's going to take the pawn on c3, and then you've got to walk your king up and zigzag your way out of this. You could have also blocked with your queen and traded. Oh shit, he's got this check. Okay, you can bring your king back. I actually missed this check. To be totally frank with you.
It's all good.
But you can block with your rook.
Alright. And he'll
then
probably just bring queen down.
c1, and then you'll bring your king up to e2.
Okay.
He's surprising me very much with his resilience, I have to say. King, okay, get that king up. And then you can centralize it on d4, and that king's going to be safe. If he checks you on e1, oh, you actually have a really sexy move. You can block that check with... Oh, I would have blocked it with a bishop, though.
Bishop.
It's okay. He'll repeat moves. He'll play queen c1. You'll come back to d2. But by blocking it with the bishop, you are disallowing any checks, and you're going to lobster pincer mate him.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. All he can do is give you a couple of spite checks. It's over. No, this guy definitely played well. But you can see that it was a little scary, but you managed to evade the checks. Good. Made on the next one.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we do one more and then a couple of notes on these two on the games, and then we'll maybe wrap up.
That so the bishop move I wouldn't have even thought of because it hangs the rook, and I
But you're threatening checkmate.
Yeah, it didn't even occur to me. That makes a lot of sense. Though.
Okay. That's good for me to know. Maybe a 5-minute game, or you're in a 3-minute mode.
We can do a 5-minute. I haven't done a.
Let's do a 5-minute game, yeah. Because
So
the PogChamps are 10 plus 5, so you'll definitely have time.
I can't play the Vienna against this.
Right,
one.
he's playing the perk.
So here, do I want to just keep developing, or do I want to chase the bishop away first?
Well, you can also control the center with your pawns. Remember that he's not played e5 or c5, so you need to punish him for that. Exactly.
Okay.
That's actually a mainline theory. Now you can deal with this bishop. Guys, ratings are refunded. Whoa, thank you, Anna, for the raid. 524. Thank you so much, Anna. All right. So he's taken on f3, which is kind of a mistake.
I just want to push this right now, don't I? Bring it up to d5.
Yeah. Grab that space.
Mm-hmm.
Grab that space. Really appreciate it, Anna. Finishing up my lesson with Charlie here. You guys come at a good time.
Bring queen back to starting position, or is there a more active square for her? Let's see.
You can bring it back to the starting position. No problem. And I want you to practice that. Sometimes these retreating moves, they can be disconcerting to the opponent. But because that knight on e5, you can get it the fuck out of there.
Yeah, so do I want to do that with the bishop or the f-pawn?
Well, do it as forcefully as possible. If you do it with the bishop, then he doesn't have to move the pawn, right?
Yep, so just do it with the pawn then.
Yep, go ahead. And then you can complete your development. You can move the bishop out, you can castle.
Is this one of the situations I'd want to castle long, considering the pawn structure on my king side?
Well, why don't you try?
Okay.
That's an interesting strategy. I'll put it this way: it's risky, but in the next week or two, I do want you to try all of these creative approaches. I give you the green light. Go ahead.
Okay. So
you got to get your pieces out.
Do I want to bring the bishop to d2 as opposed to e3?
Why? You want to bring it out as actively as possible.
Okay, so bring it to e3 instead?
Yeah, and also the d2 square is a pretty decent square for the queen. But you could also bring the queen to a more active square where it protects the e4 pawn.
Oh, I just bring it back over to f3.
Good.
Another question I had is, when do I want to look to open up the center?
So, normally if you have a development advantage, or he has his king in the center, but in this case, are you going to try to attack in the center?
No, you're going to be
you're going to attack on the king side. So keeping the center relatively close is actually good for you. That way you don't have to worry about it. Now that knight on h5, he's trying to put barriers to your attack. Can you get that knight out of there?
Yeah, I can just push up this g.
Exactly. He's probably going to take your knight on c3. That would be my guess.
Bam, big read.
Well, I know these guys. He's going to bring his knight back, and then you have to understand, how are you going to attack his king? What needs to get opened?
This H file needs to get opened.
And go ahead and open it.
Okay, so
again, these guys, he's playing far above his rating right now, but if he plays queen a5 here, then, I don't know. Because attacking like this is not easy. Interesting.
That's big.
Now that pawn on c3 is hanging.
Yeah.
I would get your king the hell out of there. I would evacuate it.
So just get it immediately up to d2 here?
Yeah. And notice that the a2 pawn is hanging. But do you give a shit about this pawn? Here's something you have to always tell yourself. When you are going for checkmate, you have to always set your priorities. Like when you're going for checkmate, you shouldn't worry about pawns. When you're in a quiet position, then it's a different story. Okay, so what should you do?
Finish my plan. Push this h pawn again.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, he's gonna play b4. Probably. Yeah, so now you're trying to open the H file. Okay, so now he decides to take.
Take.
Good.
I bring my queen over to the H file now, right?
Well, then he'll take on E4 with check. So that knight on F6, can you try to get it out of there first?
Yeah, I have to push that.
You see
first.
the order of operations. First you clear the path, then you get the... Once you deploy the queen, it's like... I don't know why, but I was watching this airplane video where like pilots have this thing they say when they can't abort a takeoff any longer. I think it's like V8. And it's the same thing here. You want to pave the way fully for the queen before you actually go for the final. Okay, so he's gone knight h5 correctly. Now your task here, well, okay, whoops, is to get that knight out of there. You need to devise a strategy to get the knight out of there.
I looked at e2 for the bishop and then moving my queen.
Lovely. He has a pretty strong move, knight e5 here. Okay, this is definitely a bit suspect. So that doesn't change what you have to do. You can't take the knight.
If I take the knight with pawn, what happens?
He takes your queen.
Oh, wait, what? Oh, with the rook. Yep, the X, right?
Yeah. So you got to move the queen where you wanted to move it anyway. Yeah, this guy is... I'm not going to say anything for sure, but he is playing very, very well. Very, very well. Knight C... Oh, and the Naroditsky jinx, Charlie.
You are an absolute animal.
I mean, this is
when it comes to
unbelievable.
jinxing these players.
It's no, but it happens even at my level. I'm playing GMs, and I'll start complimenting them, and the moment I do that, they blunder like a rook or they blunder a queen. It's like uncanny.
You need to say that more often, man.
I do. No, I just say it all the time. That's how I win all my games. It's just unbelievable. But, you know, I mean, I don't want to throw any shade on him, but this guy played fantastic game. So can I quickly invite you to an analysis board? Just a couple of concluding points on these two games.
For sure.
Perfect. So, first game. Invited. All right. Now, after d5, you could have also taken with the knight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kept the integrity of your pawn structure. Just pointing that out. You took with the pawn. So this is all good. Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason to take with the knight?
Well, to preserve your pawn structure. Like, taking with the pawn, that pawn is kind of weak. Yeah. So if he would have played knight f6, he would have had a hard time defending that pawn. Okay. There's no need to do that. You could have taken with the knight, and that way you wouldn't have any weak pawns. Now, he played incorrectly here, and you played perfectly. Bishop g5. Bishop h4 is great, castle's long, and now you open the g-file. So queen e3, does this move make sense?
Yeah.
So your queen position, it doesn't have to be literally like in your opponent's face. As long as the queen is safe, and a good way to make sure the queen is safe is that it's sheltered behind his own pawns. Rook g1, g5. Now here, let's say that you wanted to defend this pawn on b2. How could you have done that?
Just bring up the c-pawn.
Very good. And that's probably would have been even more prudent. To be honest with you, I myself underestimated his chances. But as soon as queen takes h6 is played, you have to have a light bulb that goes on in your head, and you basically tell yourself, okay, I have only one goal, which is to escape the checks, and I will sacrifice anything that needs to be sacrificed in order to do that. And that's the way that you find a move like bishop e2. Because you are constantly telling yourself that if he makes a move that's not a check, then he gets checkmated. And by the way, here, could you find the most accurate move? You played f takes e3?
Yeah, just taking the knight.
Or even moving the king up to d3. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. And finally, last game. All right. I'll invite you to another board. All right. Okay, so yeah, this guy was strong. Now the move d4, that makes sense, right? He hasn't played these moves, so you kind of punish him by controlling the center. d5, queen back, f4. So if you would have played bishop f4, then he would have had the option of remaining on e5 with the knight. You could have taken and ruined his pawn structure, but here you ensure that the knight has to move back.
Okay, that makes sense.
g4 is good. So here you could have also taken his knight in order to keep your pawn structure intact. That would have just been an option, pointing that out. And if you wanted to reduce the influence of this bishop, what would you have done here? The same move that you could have made in the previous game.
Yeah, I would have just pushed up the c-pawn.
Right, blunting the bishop. Okay, so h4, king d2, evacuating the king. Yeah, so everything here very logical. And in certain situations, you should also consider sacrificing on h5. Not necessarily here, but in certain situations. Even here. Because what you do is you clear out the h-file. And now, what are you going to do on your next move? Let's say that black plays something random. What would be the fastest way of getting the rook to h1?
I'd bring up the bishop, so I'd bring it
Where
up
would you
with
put it?
Excellent.
Excellent. How do you bring it up with tempo?
I mean, that knight's hanging, but that also blocks my rook, so
Okay.
probably would be h3.
But here's the thing. I want to make after you play bishop h3. That bishop can, and that you make a good point about the h file. But let's say the knight moves. Where can this bishop go?
F4 or F5. Sorry.
Or even what other square?
Deliver a check all the way at
go.
E6. I see.
And
now.
it can drive the king into the corner, and now.
And now I bring the rook over.
And now you bring the rook over. And he's got a couple of checks here, but you can sidestep the checks. You can go up, and then you could zigzag back down, and then even you could go king d2 right into the teeth, and he's got no checks. So, or I guess king f3 is more accurate to defend the pawn, and you win the game with a checkmate. So these sacrifices you have to consider when you have this priority of getting a rook to h1. That's when you have to allow yourself the opportunity to sack. But I liked the move bishop e2. And, okay, of course, he made it a bit easier for you, but knight c4 check would have been the unpleasant move. This would have... Well, what's the problem with taking? Like, what happens now?
No, I can't take that knight.
Right, so...
The h file.
This gets very messy. I mean, maybe you can move the king, he takes your bishop. This is anybody's game. But nonetheless, I think you played very well. You demonstrated all the key attacking ideas. So I would say in the next couple of days, maybe, and not my business to tell you what to do, but I would put the emphasis on 5-minute games, just to give yourself an opportunity to practice the openings and practice. We talked about a lot of concepts today through the problems, and I really want you to be able to cement them. So you can play a mix of 3 and 5, but PogChamps is going to be 10 plus 5. So even by playing 5-minute, you're already challenging yourself.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
And, you know, grind the problems as well the puzzles. You're in fantastic tactical form. I'm really happy with the progress. Next time we'll work more intensely on white openings, and I'll prepare drills based on the exercises that you struggled with today, and we'll keep on hammering at the various concepts.
All right, that sounds great to me, man. Thank you.
Fantastic, Charlie. My pleasure. I think we're making great progress, and despite all that I've said today, I'm pretty happy. So thanks again for getting up so early. It's always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, of course, man. Anytime. Just hit me up whenever you're free.
Fantastic. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Looking forward to the next session, Charlie. Have a great rest of the stream.
You too, man. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.